If tomorrow starts without me, there's something you should know. While I hold you close, never let you go.
Hello and welcome to The Broken Pack, a podcast focused on giving adult survivors of sibling loss a platform to share their stories and to be heard, something that many sibling loss survivors state that they never have had. Sibling loss is misunderstood. The Broken Pack exists to change that and to support survivors. I'm your host, Dr. Angela Dean. Hi, in today's episode, I had the pleasure of speaking with Judy Lipson, author and also two-time sibling loss survivor as a young adult. We talk about how difficult it was to grieve her sisters and how that delayed grieving has been for her several decades later.
Second guessing, 'cause you never know, you just never know.
Welcome, Judy. Thank you so much for joining us today. I was wondering what you wanted to tell our audience about yourself.
Angela, first of all, thank you for having me and for all that you do for the Forgotten Mourners, the siblings. I really appreciate all that you do. My name is Judy Lipson, and I like to say I'm the middle of three, and sadly, I lost both my sisters. That took me a long time to say, and I lost my sister Jane in an automobile accident in 1981 at age 22, and I lost my sister Margie 9 years later at age 35 after a 20-year battle with anorexia and bulimia. And for 30 years, I suppressed the grief, and I honor them with a ice skating fundraiser to celebrate their lives. And today I'm a skater, a mother, a grandmother, and the author of a book. And I hope to help other siblings so that they're not alone in their grief.
Thank you so much for that. It is a great book. And you're a grandmother, but you also have a brand new grandbaby as well.
Yes, my heart is very full. A week ago, we welcomed a granddaughter, Madeline, my third grandchild, who is named for my sister, Margie. And I'm going to choke up here on this podcast. And Margie was sick for 20 years. And to have this new, beautiful life to carry on her legacy is so special. And she's beautiful. My daughter, Jane, is named for my sister, Jane. And which each of these grandchildren has brought me so many mixed emotions. And I think with grief, there's so much love. And with each of these grandchildren, there's joy and there's so much love. And we miss our siblings so much. And we're torn with these antithesis of emotions. And especially with this new little girl that Margie, who suffered so much. And now she's going to have this little girl, and bringing out all that Margie really was is really very, very special.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that. So I know that you shared your story already in the book and you've shared it elsewhere. So I don't think we need to retell the book, but I'm wondering, before we even get to the story of losing them both, stories. And I think what was really striking to me is it took you a very long time to be able to even start to grieve and acknowledge the losses. So before we get to all of that, what would you like us to know about each of your sisters?
So I'll do Jane because she was the first one to pass away. Jane was 3 years younger than I was. And anybody who has a sibling, especially girls, know that you're all very different. And even though you are very different, the bottom line is that there is a lot of love. And Jane and I, there was a 3-year difference, and I was elated to have a little sister. And she and I shared a room until we were 14 years old. And I always took care of her. And I loved having a little sister. And then when she got into her tween years, we were very, very different. She thought she was cool and I was nerdy. And she was a little kind of ashamed of me. But one of her friends told me that I guess they went through my room, which I never knew till 10 years ago. And they'd always put things back. And I just found that so endearing because she never thought I was cool enough, but yet they would go through my room. And she was full of life, probably pushed the envelope a little too far, but that's who she was. And she had a lot of friends and was very spunky and really lived life to its fullest. She wasn't the greatest student because she talked a lot in school, but, that's who she was. And Margie was 2 years older than I was, and she was who I always wanted to be. She was beautiful. She was popular. She was a cheerleader. And even as sick as she was, she could always read me and I could never get anything by her. And we were always very, very close. And when she got sick, she was sick with anorexia and bulimia for 20 years. It was very upset because it was somebody that it was not my Margie, but yet parts of her were there. And it was very challenging, but she was always still a piece of her, my Margie.
Mm-hmm.
And she was a lot of fun and she could talk to anybody. And she was just a very good person.
Mm-hmm.
Very, very smart, extremely smart.
I have some quotes here that I wanted to ask you about. In the book that you said, it was in chapter 3. So you're talking about I think the title of the chapter is 3 Sisters. And you said that 3 sisters, a trio, a triangle, a tripod, and a trilogy. Our stories are not what we dreamed, but the sum of us. Genealogy, the Lipson girls. And I was wondering if you could say more about that and what your relationships were like, because that feels very cohesive.
Well, it's like we were always 3. So at camp, we took the bus to camp and we sang the song side by side, dressed alike in denim dresses. We were always the Lipson sisters, 3 of us carpooling to Hebrew school together. The 3 of us took ice skating lessons together. And it was just, that's who we are. And there's a picture that I used for Celebration of Sisters. There's a black and white of us. There's so many photos of the 3 of us. And you can see that we're always attached together. Like our arms are always around each other, that we're always anchored together. Somebody's arm is always around each other. And that's who I thought my life with sisters were always going to live together. Who else are you going to complain about your parents together? There's always going to be this legacy, this genealogy. And then this picture on the slide, we're squashed together and I'm in the middle. And that's the antithesis of who we are. So that I'm in the middle, anchored by both of them, but we're always the 3, or we're standing in the pool and Jane's on the bottom, Margie and I are together, or we're standing in our puffy winter coats and usually Jane's in the middle and Margie and I are holding her on either side. So that there's always pictures, but we're always holding on to each other because that's who we are. So it's like a triangle, like always together.
Right. I'm fascinated by the language that you're using, given where you are. Do you feel, because it took so long for you to be able to even start to acknowledge that you were grieving, do you feel like you were hanging on in that same way, that you were anchored by them for all of those 30 years between their losses and now?
Those 30 years were so different. And I didn't know what grief was, Angela, to be honest with you. And I felt I just kept myself on such a busy treadmill and I didn't know what grief was. And I always felt like something was missing, but I didn't know what. And I couldn't describe it because I didn't know what it was.
Right.
And it's almost like a twin who has a sixth sense that they always know that something is off and they know, they feel, I have no research on this, but I've heard from other people, like a twin knows, like when the other feels something, like they wake up in the middle of the night. And it's like the night Jane died, both Margie and I woke up at that hour of the night. So I think I just didn't know what grief was. And I think I was grieving but I couldn't describe it. I couldn't feel it. I had put up such a wall and just kept going and didn't know. And it was a combination of the grief and the traumas and everything that I just kept going and going and going and taking care of my parents and taking care of my 2 daughters that I didn't stop.
I remember you talking about that in the book around, you went back to your new job. Was it after Jane died? And that your parents also just shut down eventually, stop talking about the losses?
Well, I was living in New York and they were in Boston. And I think in every family, everybody grieves differently, even
Mm-hmm.
siblings, parents, children, everybody grieves
Right.
differently. And you're all, you don't know how to communicate. And that's when the walls break down or the walls come up. And it depends on how you're going to grieve.
I would agree with that wholeheartedly. So do you want to share a little bit, whatever you're comfortable sharing, about losing each of your sisters? What that was like?
Well, Jane was such a shock. Obviously, it was a car accident. And I think that, again, I was 25. She was 22. I didn't know what it was. And I was in retail. I was in Christmas. So I just went back and I didn't have anybody to talk about or share this with. And you go through that identity. Well, who am I now?
Mm-hmm.
Am I the youngest? Who am I?
Right.
And felt like I had to be there for my parents and be a cheerleader and all of that. And I just got on this roller coaster treadmill of a ride and just kept going. I have no recollection of her funeral at all. None. And then I got married shortly thereafter, moved back to Boston and just kept going. And then Margie started to decline and there we went.
And so you were a young professional in a new city trying to navigate a new life. And then all of a sudden it was a new life without one of your sisters.
And at that time it was 1981 and I didn't have anybody else to talk to or share it with. And I also didn't really understand what I was going through. So I probably was grieving and didn't know that I was grieving or what grief was.
Right.
And just was in that fog that everybody goes through, but didn't really know what it was. And was in retail in the height of Christmas season.
Right.
And if I had cried, I would have lost my job. So I just went on.
I worked in retail before being a psychologist. I fully understand what you're talking about there. That's unfortunate. And so you moved on and you're raising your girls. Do you want to talk about losing Margie?
Yeah. Margie, I guess Margie was, we knew Margie was not going to live. I mean, at some point, and it was a matter of time. And it's still a shock. I mean, I don't know how I describe that. I don't know if people have siblings who have died of cancer or other illnesses that they know, that you sort of know, or substance. I don't know because I have not dealt with that. And it's still a shock. And it was still heartbreaking. And I remember making the phone calls and just sobbing and just feeling so alone. And again, like, who am I? Am I the only? But, I realized that I'm not. I'm always going to be the middle of three sisters.
Right.
But it's, again, who am I now without them? And I just went through, is this really my life? Is this real?
Yeah, that's an interesting point. As we lose a sibling, because our identities are often wrapped up in like being someone's older or younger or the middle or X number of sibling, that when we lose that sibling, it's such a common thing. Like, how do you now identify? And that happened to you twice.
Well, I think with Margie, I felt more guilt that I should have done more, that her illness was a very difficult mental illness. It's very challenging, and that I didn't do enough, or could I have said this? Could I have done this? I know in my head I couldn't, but in my heart, you always think there's more guilt involved with her death than Jane's. I didn't have guilt. I mean, that was just a tragedy.
Yeah. I recall you saying in the book too that you had believed one thing about Jane's accident, and later you went on that search for the information. What was that about for you, trying to find that information?
Well, I had been told that it was a car malfunction, and it doesn't make a difference, but somehow after Margie died, I just felt I needed to know, and it was speed involved.
Mhm.
And I needed to know that. So I
Mhm.
went to the police station and got the police report. And it's just something that I just felt I needed to know. I
Mhm.
just needed to know all the truths after all these years. Wasn't going to it doesn't make any difference, but somehow
Mhm.
for my own, I don't know, peace of mind, I just needed to know the truths.
Mhm.
Nobody talked about them or whatever, but I needed to know.
Mhm.
I think sometimes when people die, they tend to create people that aren't who they are. And listen, we all have our strengths, our warts or whatever, but that makes us who we are. And that's fine.
Mhm. So what has it been like to start to engage with grief and live with grief now?
It's been, it's been mixed. On the one hand, I'm incredibly grateful to the people that I've met and been able to be open and share with other siblings like
Mhm.
yourself and other people that I've met. And that has been a true gift that I
Mm.
wish I had had 40 plus years ago.
Right.
I think it's been wonderful, and that these bereaved siblings speak my language and
Mhm.
understand. And a part of me, I tried groups or whatever. The other piece is that it's been emotionally very draining to keep
Mm.
sharing my story and almost going through grieving again, like as a newly
Mhm.
bereaved. It's really out of my comfort zone as an introvert to get out there and share my
Mhm.
story. But I hope that I can help somebody else in their grief.
Mm.
It's also, after all these years, letting the walls down, but it's also allowing me to feel and being compassionate to myself and allowing myself to feel that it's okay after these family life cycle events. Instead of just keep going down. If I have to cry for a day, it's okay. And allowing
Mhm.
myself to do that. So I've come a long way with letting my heart and the walls down. So that's been very positive.
Mhm. And I honor that, and I thank you for sharing your story here. I know that you've shared it elsewhere, and this is one of those times that it's probably getting hard, especially with everything else you have going on. It's funny because the reason that I'm doing what I'm doing is that there was not a lot of support even in 2020, and so to think back to the 80s and 90s, there was even more of a mental health stigma at the time. And grief is not, and I'm not saying that's a mental illness, that's just normal part of life, but where you typically find support is with a professional. And you mentioned that that wasn't even helpful for you then. I wonder if you wanted to say more about that.
Well, I think everybody is also different in what
Mhm.
they need. Some people like a group and like sharing. Some people need just one-on-one.
Mm.
For me, groups are overwhelming. I'm an introvert. I like a one-on-one. I mean, I'm now in a sibling book group and I'm a
Mhm.
reader, and that feels like my landing place right now.
Mhm.
So I think some people now with online groups find the groups fine. Some people need to read everything. I think everybody has to find what works for them. But at least today, there are a lot more opportunities. More and
Mhm.
more siblings are sharing their stories, which is excellent. And I think that really helps other individuals, because the siblings, when you lose a sibling, you lose the siblings. But now there's books out about brothers, about sisters, about suicide, about illness, about all different
Mhm.
multiple losses, so that people can find books that, are relevant to them. And then
Mhm.
general sibling loss books, I'm glad that people are having the courage to write their own stories.
Yeah, for sure. So it's interesting that as an introvert, you put yourself very much in the spotlight with the skating and the fundraising for skating. How did that come about?
So I know, is that wild? Talking about that. So I wanted to do a fundraiser to honor my sisters. We all skated, so I do this fundraiser, and I have no clue how I have the guts to go out there. I guess I do it for them, and that's what gives me the courage to go out there, because it's so out of my comfort zone, but I do it to honor them, and that's why I do it. And, we talked a lot about this. If we hadn't had these losses, would we do these things that we're doing today? Who knows? So it's a beautiful fundraiser that I did for a little over a decade. And I can just see them like laughing. Oh my God, Judy's out there, because it's so not me.
Yeah. Are you still skating?
I am still skating. I hope to teach my grandchildren.
Oh, fantastic. How old are the grandchildren?
I have one who's going to be 4. I have one who's 6 months. And now I have the one who's a week old.
Exciting.
I'm 66. I'm going to be skating until they take me off.
Are you still doing the fundraiser?
No, I closed that chapter. It was time, but I hope that to do something else, I'm not quite sure yet. I have to figure that out.
Yeah. What was the connection with skating with them?
We had all taken skating lessons as girls, and I just wanted to do something that was fun. And skating was something that I always did all the way through. And when I was going through the heavy grieving process after all this time, skating was my meditation, my peace, my solace, my joy. And I guess underlying it, it was the connection, the circle back to my sisters without really knowing it. And so it's my go-to place when I need to just, tune out. And we all skated, so it was a fun thing to do. And my sisters were fun. So I wanted to do something that kind of honored them. And I can feel them each on my shoulder and saying, go out there, Judy, do this.
And you're also part of a speakers bureau. Did I see that recently as well?
Yes, this is a brand new opportunity that came out. It's for grief. It's a speakers bureau with people who have suffered all various kind of losses, and that we can speak to various groups. And they have wonderful resources on grief for all different types of grief and how to manage and connect with all different types of organizations.
So if we can go back just for a minute, what would you say, or what do you think that you needed back then that you weren't able to tap into until later?
When I was 25, yes. I don't think I understood what grief was. And I think that if I had somebody to talk to about it, just to understand what a loss is and what that means, and having somebody else to talk to about it, somebody else who had lost a sibling, and kind of navigating the process, and know that everybody's journey is different. And, some people cry every day. Some people want to read everything. Some people don't. But just to understand that, like the fog that I went through, or breaking down in tears for no reason at all, that it's all part, you're going through the grieving process and understanding it, that I didn't understand what it was.
Right. Understanding that was no reason, that there was a reason. It was your grief.
It
but
was
at the time
grief.
It felt like, yeah.
Right. And to take care of yourself, because you're always busy taking care of somebody else. And that my parents couldn't talk about my sisters because it was too painful for them. But as a result, I didn't. And so many memories were lost. And that's the piece that one of the hardest for me. And having nobody to talk to about my sisters. And it's the whole conversation about grief that people are uncomfortable with. So it's opening up that dialogue and being able to talk about it.
And now that you've done that, have you found it's easier to connect with people, like people that remember them?
Yes, I have. And just through the fundraiser, their lives are out there. I mean, it was about them and sharing the photos, and their friends come to the fundraiser, and that they're still remembered after all these years. I mean, Jane's been gone 42 years, and Margie's been gone 33 years. It's a long time. And that really touches my heart that they're still remembered after all these years.
Yeah. It sounds like you've carried them with you for all of this time.
I guess subconsciously, but not knowing.
Yeah. What else would you want to share with other bereaved siblings or family members of bereaved sibling?
That it's really never too late to grieve, and everybody's journey is their own, and to give yourself some compassion, because grief is part of us. It doesn't have to define us, but it's definitely part of us. And I think that people who have not lost somebody don't really understand that. And it's hard for us to help others understand that this is definitely part of our lives. And our lost ones are forever part of our lives.
You mentioned at the beginning, you had brought up this idea of having joy and in grief, right? And that is a concept that I think it's hard. It's absolutely what happens, but I think it's hard for people to understand that. So can you share more about
it's love.
that?
It's love. Love in grief and love in joy. That's what I meant. So there's love in both. So I had it with each 3 of my grandchildren. So when my first grandchild was born, I got back on the ice after 8 days, and I got this shaking feeling. And I know that that's a tsunami of tears. I get that when I know I'm going to cry. And I got off the ice and I went home, and I couldn't imagine. And it's the feeling I got when I went back to work after Jane died and after Margie died. And I was like, what is going on with it? What is wrong? The ice is my relaxation. I should be excited to be back on the ice. And I realized that Jane's death changed my life. And this first grandchild changed my life. He brought me joy, and the grief brought me sadness. But the bottom line, there was love with both, and they both changed my life. Then my second grandchild was born 6 months ago, and he was 5 weeks premature. So in the Jewish religion, we have the bris that was postponed because he was late. And it was a beautiful ceremony. 4 generations of my family was there. And it was a beautiful, beautiful ceremony. And these 2 little boys would have cousins. My daughters were there. I came home and I cried for 2 days. And again, so much joy, but also my heart hurt because my sisters weren't there. And knowing that these boys would have cousins and my daughters would have each other as sisters. And now this third grandchild is named for Margie. So again, the joy and the sadness, the grief and the love, and the joy and the love.
That's beautiful. Thank you for explaining that. You said that you don't have a lot of memories. And actually what struck me as I reread your book the other day, what strikes me is you have a lot of memories in the book. So it sounds like there are many that you feel like you've forgotten or that you can't share. I'm wondering what that's like for you.
Well, when Jane died, a woman at the Shiva said to me, don't be upset. There's a time you're going to forget your sisters. And that haunted me.
Oh.
And then my parents didn't talk about my sisters. So there's a lot that I don't remember. And so when I went through the complicated grief study, when I started the really buckling down and doing the grief work after 30 years, we went through a lot of therapy. And I finally looked at the pictures and went through a lot of work, and a lot of the memories came back. And the truth is that we're not going to remember everything.
Right.
And if you and I went to the same party, what I remember and you remember are going to be very different.
Right.
So I'm just grateful that I can start to remember, and that I can talk to people and hear stories that I never heard before. And for that, I'm very grateful. And I don't remember every single detail, but I do know that there's a lot of love because I found cards and letters, and that's the most important thing.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. So how are you doing today in your grief, given the little newborn too?
It's up and down because in some ways I'm sort of like a newly bereaved because I'm more raw now than I was because it's more to the surface. It's not squashed or suppressed. I'm allowing myself to feel, but I'm grateful that I have people to talk to today, or I can reach out to people, and that's something I never had. So I'm very grateful for that. I know that because of the birth of this grandchild, and I'm speaking at a conference, I crammed too many podcasts into a tight window, and I learned my lesson that that's not a good process for me. So we're always learning about what works for us in our grief.
Yeah. Does it feel like too much today?
No, not at all. But I had scheduled a couple of podcasts like within a short, like 2-week period, and that was too much. So I have to space them out a little bit in talking about the grief, that it's not too much overload. I have to spread it out to give myself time to decompress, and then go on to the next one.
I can relate to that. In my work as a psychologist, we learn all about self-care and managing vicarious trauma and all of these very important concepts about how to manage our emotions around that. And so in doing this podcast and talking to so many lovely people and people that have not been on the podcast as well that I've talked to, it also hit me like a little harder than I expected it to. I'm holding on to everyone's stories and I'm honored to tell them. And then I also didn't really expect my own grief to hit it in that same way. So yeah, I can relate. You had mentioned too in the book about when hearing about other people's siblings. And I think this is something that is common. And I wanted to hear where you are with it now. You said hearing individuals speak about their siblings always felt like a knife in my heart. But I always smiled and listened. Memories of Margie and Jane in my subconscious yet remained at the foremost of my heart. I started noticing that pieces of memories were coming alive.
Yeah, it was something that, some people were just, sometimes were harder than others. And I think that, I think people don't think about it. And I think they don't realize grief is a tough topic for people to recognize and talk about and understand. And I think that it's like mental illness. I think the more we talk about it and help them understand, I think the landscape will change.
Have you seen the documentary Speaking Grief?
No, I haven't.
It's quite fascinating. It very much addresses this. I saw it at a conference I was at recently. And you can download it online. In fact, I'll put the link in the show notes or send that to you as well. But the idea is our society is not comfortable talking about grief. And then the opening scene makes a very vivid picture of how much grief is in the world and how much we don't talk about it. But I do agree with you that we need to normalize grief because unfortunately it's a very common experience. We all will experience in one way or the other. So thank you for that.
Yeah, because when you tell people that you lost a sibling, it's astounding how many people have lost a sibling. It's sad.
Yeah, and I think what's astounding about that is, well, so many people have siblings, so logically the math makes sense that so many of us have lost siblings. But I think what the shock is we don't talk about it. It's always around your parents or the partners or the kids. And I've said that before. We just need to normalize it a little bit more.
I think it's starting to change. I know the Compassionate Friends does a big group, and I will be the keynote at the bereaved parents. And I know they're trying to get more of a sibling presence there as well. So I think hopefully, more and more you're doing it. More and more people are trying to advocate for the siblings, which is great.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you for that. Well, unfortunately, I can't attend that conference, but I hope it goes well for you.
Thank you.
When is that?
July 20th to the 23rd.
Okay. Well, that's fantastic that you'll be the keynote to help parents also understand this loss. Well, is there anything else you want to share before I ask my last question?
I would just like to say that I've done this fundraiser to honor my sisters, and that for me, it was especially in November because that was their birthdays, and it helped me get through that time. And I know many siblings feel many ways to honor their siblings, and it can be simple as writing a journal entry or whatever. But for me, it was something that helped me get through that horrible time of year every single year.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just, I'm grateful I had it. It was a very good run. And I was very touched that the girls' friends came, and that this is going to be the first year I'm not going to do it. So it'll be very interesting, but it was a nice way to honor them for all those years.
What was it called?
Celebration of Sisters.
Mm. Oh, like your book, right?
Like my book.
Do you want to say more about the book at all?
Yeah. So the reason I wrote the book, and like I said, I'm a very private person, so to get out there and share it was not difficult. But when we established the fund for Margie and Jane at Mass General Hospital in 1999, the doctor said to me, "You should write about these girls." And I'm like, and then when my father passed away in 2011, I went to a support group of people who have lost fathers, and the social worker told me, "You have to share your story." And other people told me to share my story. And it just mushroomed because I had written some articles, and I really wrote it to help another sibling so they're not alone in their loss, which is why I wrote the book, and to share my sisters.
And I appreciate that, because as someone who's not been grieving my sibling as long, it is helpful to have other people's stories to hear and listen to and read. So thank you for that. The last question I have is, what are some of your favorite memories of your sisters that you would like to share?
My favorite memories are with Jane when she decided to go to overnight camp, and we got to ride the sister bus to overnight camp and having a little sister at camp. And even though she was a pain in my butt and she would come to my bunk all the time, part of me really loved having her there. And with Margie, she always said, "Judy, jump," and I would say, "How high?" And we snuck it downstairs to my father's office where all the wrapped Hanukkah presents were, and we snooped. And I was like, "We're going to get in trouble. We're going to get in trouble." And she said, "No, no, 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 no." And of course we went. And when we opened them, of course, we had to act surprised. And I think not until we were in our 20s, we told our parents what we had done. So that was two of my...
Did they know?
What?
Were they surprised?
No, they didn't know. They didn't know. No.
Well, thank you. I really enjoyed talking to you. And
thank you so much for having me.
You're welcome. Take care. Thank you so much for listening. Our theme song was written by Joe Millwood and Brian Dean and was performed by Joe Millwood. If you would like more information on The Broken Pack, go to our website, thebrokenpack.com. Be sure to sign up for our newsletter, Wild Grief, to learn about opportunities and receive exclusive information and grieving tips for subscribers. Information on that, our social media, and on our guests can be found in the show notes wherever you get your podcasts. Please follow, subscribe, and share. Thanks again.
You're second guessing, oh, you never know, you just never know.